Hey, hi, welcome to your Unit 4 set of videos. Make sure you know exactly what to do for this set, and have a great day. Alrighty, so this is video number 4 here, and our topic for today is long distance trade and traveling. So, what are our objectives? How does long distance trade and travel impact our world? Who are some of the leading individuals to travel? And then finally, what were the changes and continuities from the classical to post-classical empires? What state policies, mercantile practices, and innovations in transportation contributed to the intensification of cross-cultural exchanges? Or in other words, our theme. So let's go ahead and get started here, looking at patterns of long-distance trade. So there's many reasons why someone would go on a long distance travel, right? You have in this time period, nomadic peoples, right? They're just doing their everyday thing, just traveling around, migrating, or perhaps it's for conquest. You have forced slave labor from Eastern Europe or Africa who were forced to travel. And then you also have pilgrimage, where practicing, worshiping individuals such as Buddhists or Christians or Muslims were going on a pilgrimage to visit their holy shrines. And usually a pilgrimage is a very, very long journey. But for our notes today, the key motivations we are going to be looking at is obviously trade, diplomacy, and also missionary activity. But we're going to focus more so on trade for today. And the results of all of these traveling and trading around is the spread of technological innovations that we've been seeing all throughout this class thus far. So looking at trading cities. So if there's an increase in trade, well, there's automatically going to be an increase in trading cities. Oh, misspelled trading. Oh, well. And ports as well, right? Cities next to the water. And because there's an increase of trade, increase of cities, specifically dealing with that, you're going to attract a lot of consumers, right? Buyers and sellers, as well as bankers, etc., from all over the world. So now these cities are becoming really populated with so many individuals throughout the world. So it's really becoming metropolitan. Around the 13th century, we saw how the Mongolian Empire was going throughout Eurasia trying to, grab and conquer as much land as possible. But because of these campaigns, it caused a lot of economic disruption all throughout Asia. It destroyed dynasties and caused economic decline in Southwest Asia. So, primarily India, as well as what we now know as the Middle East. But because of these campaigns, even though it did lead to a decline in the economies of these empires, it did lay the foundation, the political foundation, for long distance trade along the Silk Roads that we've already touched upon a couple of times. But I'm going to give you two very famous examples of long distance traders using their political influence with their traveling. And that is Marco Polo. Never heard of him. But another individual that you probably never heard of is Ibn Battuta. So let's go ahead and get started with Marco Polo. So Marco Polo, as seen right here, wow, what a guy, is one of the most best known long distance travelers, especially during the Mongolian times. And Marco Polo was from Venice, so he was a Venetian traveler. And this map right here shows you exactly the extent of his travels. I know it's a little bit interesting to see, but he essentially started all the way here in Venice, traveling all throughout what at that time was part of the Mongolian Empire. During Marco Polo's travels, specifically to Mongolia, when they were conquering China, he was able to meet Kublai Khan, who was one of the sons of Genghis Khan. And Kublai Khan was consolidating his power in China during this time, as I stated. So when Marco Polo met Kublai Khan really had a nice liking to Marco Polo. He enjoyed his company, so he kind of stuck around with the Mongolian Empire for a very, very long time. Kublai allowed Marco Polo to pursue his mercantile interests in China and also sent him on numerous diplomatic missions, which is quite interesting to have someone who's not even part of your country, right? A Venetian be representing the Mongolian Empire. So it really shows you not only how the relationship between Kublai and Marco Polo was, but it also shows you the amount of trust that is given during this time period. So in total, Marco Polo spent 17 years. Wow, 17 years with Kublai, and then they finally decided to leave and return back home to Venice, where Kublai said, yes, you can go home and leave. Thank you so much for visiting us. And so instead of going back on land, Marco Polo decided to go all the way through the ocean to get back to Venice to kind of extend their journeys and their adventure. And they finally arrived in 1295 back home. When Marco Polo came back to Venice, he kind of stumbled into a predicament where essentially he was captured and put in prison during war between his native Venice as well as a rival in the area. And while he was imprisoned, Marco Polo would be telling various travelers and prisoners of his times in the Mongolian Empire. So even though he wasn't actually able to write about his own adventures because he was put into prison and captured, his stories were relayed by prisoners, right, by other people, which is one of the reasons why we don't have that much information about Marco Polo, and yet he's incredibly romanticized in literature. Marco Polo's stories deeply influenced European readers, where he always mentioned the textiles, the spices, the gems, and other goods that he observed during his travels. And European merchants took note of this and were incredibly eager to participate in this very lucrative, exclusive trade network all throughout Eurasia, which is Europe and Asia, right? AKA all of this red arrows that you see there on that map. Marco Polo, as well as his father and his uncle, were all part of this trip. They were among the first Europeans to actually visit China, but they were not the last, obviously. In their place came hundreds of other, mostly Italian travelers who were incredibly curious about Eurasia, about the world, and it really started to help increase European participation in the larger economy of the Eastern Hemisphere. Our next example that we're going to be looking at is Ibn Battuta, as shown all here. And the map that I'm going to be referring to is this drawn map to the left, which is quite extensive, especially for this individual here. So Ibn Battuta was the best known Muslim traveler. So Ibn mainly traveled in Islamic ruled lands, but very few Muslims were educated in the laws of those lands. So, with his legal credentials, Ibn had little difficulty trying to find government positions. He was mainly an advisor and a supervisor as well to various empires, such as in India, um, as well as Africa. In India, he would supervise the affairs of wealthy mosques as well as be present during court cases, which he strictly enforced according to Islamic standards of justice. So, all in all, Ibn would consult Muslim leaders all throughout where he traveled to and offered advice about government, about Islamic laws, as well as what types of proper relations that each of the sexes should have. And like many legal scholars whose stories were unrecorded, Ibn provided guidance in the ways of Islam in societies that were just recently converted to the faith, which made him an incredibly desirable resource during this time since he was that one leading source. So here, it's just a little mini recap of those two travelers with their maps, right? The red here is all of what Marco Polo traveled, while the green color is what Ibn Battuta traveled as well. And you can kind of see they had a very interesting, similar path. So just really quickly in your brains for a moment, just compare these two routes. How did the two men choose where to travel, and perhaps what conditions made it possible for them to travel that far? Right? What are some pros and cons to that as well? But with that thought, we're going to go ahead and move forward and looking at the long distance travels and cross cultural exchanges. So, with these travels, obviously, it's going to encourage you to exchange your cultures, right? Your way of life, your speaking, your religion, your foods, etc. And a great example is through those troubadours that we talked about in our last video. And the troubadours would gain inspiration from Muslims through their poetry and music, etc. Also, these travelings and these exchanges would help facilitate agricultural and technological diffusion, right? Diffusion meaning spread. And the two examples we're going to look at here is through sugarcane as well as gunpowder. Let's focus on sugarcane for a moment. So Muslims first were the first ones to help with this diffusion and help continue it as well, because their empire had a lot of various sugar farms, especially in modern day India. And it became incredibly popular with Europeans after the Crusades, where during the Crusades there is a lot of interactions, whether positive or negative, that's up to you to decide, between the two peoples, between Christians and Muslims. And because of this new introduction to sugarcane, there's a lot of plantations that were rising in specifically Italy. With this new rise, this newfound popularity in sugar, there is obviously a rapid demand for it. And that demand requires more workers and more land. So now during, the late 1400s, you have this kind of quick, it's not new, but it's a very quick introduction to a new type of slave labor, where now instead of getting slaves from Eastern Europe or from Northern Africa, now you're getting a lot of slaves from Muslim war captives from the Crusades, for example. And we're going to see this continue, especially when we are looking in our, I think, next unit, looking at the development of the transatlantic slave trade. And then now moving on to gunpowder technologies. So the Mongolians, when they took control of China, they were the ones to really first spread gunpowder from China. And some of the ways that they did this was they just created gunpowder based weapons, such as bombs. And they would use these bombs against their enemies. So, for example, the Muslims' army. When the Muslims kind of saw this new technology, they soon developed it and created similar technology that they used against the Crusaders during those time periods. And then soon after, it came into Europe with cannons. So you can see this nice progression, this nice cross-cultural exchange of weaponry right here. But once again, the spread of technology is not a new thing. We've been looking at this all throughout not only this unit, but this whole entire semester. But the key part here is that it was intense, right? This intense interaction period created profound influences in people's lives, such as through diplomacy, through sugar, right? Through gunpowder. And we're going to see more so next unit how this really impacted peoples. So that's where we're going to end it for today. So what did we learn? Number one, long distance travel impacted our world by bringing peoples and cultures together. Between 1000 and 1500 CE, this was one, another typo, of the first times where the Eastern Hemisphere intensely participated in globalization, which is a term that we've used before in this class. Two of the most important travelers of their time were Marco Polo and Ibn Battuta, where they both had some sort of diplomatic foreign relationship and had to be put into various roles. And then lastly, one prominent example of a practice that came from the classical empire to post-classical empire was trade, right? That's one of the most important things that we've been focusing on throughout this whole entire unit. And this idea changed to adapt to the demands of the post-classical empires, specifically with technology. Transportation contributed towards the cross-cultural exchanges of empires by allowing these long-distance travels to occur. Now that you're done with that video, once again, make sure you know exactly what you need to do for this, and I'll see you next time.